Assalamu alaikum. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you guys doing? Good, good. Okay, so we have this session here with Kathy Manley that we all know. She's the legal director of NCPCF. And we have Stepanian. Some of us know him. He's one of the, I'm going to read his bio, which is where exactly? So we know him. He's an animal rights activist and a former political prisoner who was incarcerated in the CMU Marianne. He was one of the first non-Muslims placed in the CMU as a balancer. His works include ending violence of counterterrorism laws, cruelty to animals, and dismantling the prison industrial complex that affect all our communities. He's the senior director of media relations at Fitzgibbon Media and co-founder of Sparrow Media Project. He's currently putting together a video project about Muslim families targeted on the war on terror in the U.S. So we welcome both of them to share with us about the laws and policies that around the Bureau of Prison.
Okay, normally I probably wouldn't use the microphone, but my voice is kind of weak this morning, so I'm going to use it at least for a while. So I put together a little handout with just some basic information. Some of you know more than I do about dealing with the BOP because you've been dealing with them so much. But I'm just going to go through some of this stuff and I'll pass this around. And Andy's going to add his experiences from inside, which he knows more than I do too, because I know what their regulations are supposed to be with a lot of this stuff, but they don't follow their own rules a lot of times. So, he knows how they've actually done things. So the Bureau of Prisons is this huge bureaucracy. As you may know, they have a website, which I put org instead of gov, but it's bop.gov, and you can look people up on it, and you can find out, what prison they're in. That's the only way you can find out when unless your loved one calls you and tells you where they are. The only way you can find out usually is by this website, if they move somebody. And get the address and phone number. They have an email on there where they say you can contact them if you have any concerns, but I think that email never gets answered. I don't know if anybody's ever gotten a response from that email. When I called a prison once and said, I sent an email to that email, and he said, that just goes into a black hole. Like, that's just something they put there to make people think they can do something, but then they never respond. This is typical. And sometimes they don't even answer their phone when you call. They just let it ring. But they have, as you may know, when somebody first comes after they get sentenced, and the part of the sentencing process is this thing called a pre-sentence report, and that has a lot of information that the Bureau of Prison uses to designate people to what prison they're going to go to. And a lot of times there's wrong information in those reports too. And they don't even give the person a copy of their own called PSR. They don't even give it to them because they say, well, if somebody was cooperating with the government, they're a snitch, that then other people could get hold of that report and find that out, and then there's been problems with that before, but a lot of times that information isn't even in there, and so it's kind of an excuse to keep people from finding out what false information is in there to be used against them. But they have this whole point system where they look at the nature of the crime, in which in this case they're fake crimes basically, but the way they're defined is very, very serious fake crimes. So, like, if it's a terrorism case, they look at that as the greatest severity kind of offense, and they look at the length of the sentence, and they look at other past history and all this other stuff, and they come up with security point level, and then there's different levels of prisons. There's maximum security, Supermax, like the ADX in Colorado, and medium, and low, and then minimum, which is a camp. But if somebody's not a citizen, they can't go to a camp. And with these cases, a lot of times they have this thing called central inmate monitoring. I don't know if they did that with you. Do you want to add anything to it?
Well, so I don't want to sidetrack you from your outline, but one thing that I noticed when I was in the CMU is that gentlemen that were there more often than not had security classification points in between 9 and 13 points. At 13 points is when you qualify for a medium security facility. To give you an idea of the custody classification, the minimum security, which is a camp of sorts, it doesn't have a fence. It's kind of like it's like the onus is on you that you don't leave your bunk bed and you're part of a workforce program that's out and about in the community. That is minimum security classification in the federal system. And sometimes individuals that have less than 5 years or that have nonviolent offenses like monetary infractions and things like that, or tax dodging, they'll get sent to those types of institutions. And those are largely the nonviolent offenses. Those will sit between like the 9 and 10 point range. At 11 points, it switches from minimum security to low security. Low security is the same kind of institution. The only difference is there's a fence and you're not allowed to work in the general community. But outside of that, there's no jail cells. It's usually bunk beds, and you can walk to and from your bunk area to a library or a dining hall or something like that. Medium security prison gets into more of the standard fare of what you'd imagine a medium security or normal prison would look like. Jail cells, kind of controlled movement. There's still a yard, there's still a library, things like that, but you're only allowed to walk to them at certain designated points of the day, and there's usually individuals with some sort of armament watching you as you walk from point A to point B. When I was designated to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, was in what was called a medium-high security facility. It was a hybrid facility in North Carolina. The custody classification above me would be high, and then the highest would be the Supermax in ADX, Colorado, Florence, Colorado. To qualify for the ADX Florence, Colorado, you need 24 points or more, am I correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I believe it's 24 or higher to get to that place. And the way they aggregate these points together is everything from your age, because if you're younger, you're more likely to get into a fight while in the prison complex, the length of sentence, the severity of the crime, and whether or not you have infractions while you've already been incarcerated.
And the amount of time you've already served of your sentence.
Exactly, yeah. So, for example, your points will decrease with programming. Let's say you're involved with some sort of educational programming, or you're on a soccer team, or whatever it is, it shows that you're able to get along with others. 6 months to a year to 3 years after that, your points will start to decrease. It incentivizes people to behave well, and you'll be able to get out of this really harsh prison and get to a lighter security prison towards the end of your sentence, eventually a halfway house, and eventually you're on your way home. The communications management unit exists in a bubble outside of that system that's been designed to try to create some sort of accountability or due process in the prison systems. The ADX existed for individuals that have substantive crimes pegged to terrorism. Now, I know there are some families who have loved ones that are in the ADX, but usually the individuals that are designated there have one substantive crime and not just the conspiracy count, or not just the material support to terrorist charge.
It was a sting operation from 1993. He had a very minor role in it, but they just sent him there because it was connected to that case, I guess.
Well, so
but it was all a sting case.
Does he have a special administrative measure?
They didn't have SAMs on him. No.
Well, so there are obviously some outliers, and so I apologize if I'm wrong about any. I'm just talking
but
about
in general, it's
from my own experience. What I noticed was that these men that were there had between 9 and 11 points that put them either at the minimum or low security.
The CMU?
Yeah, the CMU. And these were most of the Muslim men that I interfaced with at the Marion CMU, and this was in 2008. And when I looked at them, and I looked at some of the white gentlemen that were there, the other individuals that weren't Muslim, they had very, very, very high points. And I said, well, I don't understand this disparity. because technically isn't this not only A, unconstitutional, but B, illegal to place individuals with such low custody classifications right next to someone who has an exceptionally high classification. Now, I'm not trying to disparage one individual person, but there was one person that was there who was part of a white supremacist group that was, if the allegations are correct, responsible for robbing Brinks trucks in the 80s and attempting to poison the water supply around Seattle. Now, this is a very serious crime. He is accused of killing a radio show host, I forgot, it was a Jewish man who was hosting a radio show somewhere around Denver. He's accused of killing that individual. Not all of these charges came to fruition. However, though, 3 of them stuck, and so he's serving life in prison. So to see young or middle-aged Muslim men with no violent history whatsoever being forced to share a space with someone with a hyper-violent background, I thought was a liability and a lawsuit waiting to happen for the Bureau of Prisons. Not only that, but they're putting individuals in there that don't have like-minded politics. If you are, kind of cramming people together in a very small setting, some of them are Nazis and some of them are Muslim, or one of them was Jewish. It's a very dangerous setting, especially when in the CMU, unlike the other prisons, the guards are very hands-off. And that was another thing to take away for me at the Communications Management Unit, was that the guards themselves, at least in 2008 while I was there, were receiving instructions not to talk to the inmates. And so there was almost no communication whatsoever between the guards that were outside of our kind of, I don't know what to call it, it's a sealed area where we were. And they would only respond, say, if someone got sick or someone fell down or there was a fight, they might show up then. But they wouldn't talk to us, they wouldn't interface with us whatsoever. We were feeding each other through food that came in on a dumbwaiter. It was like an elevator that came down, we'd push a cart out and we'd share food amongst ourselves. So we weren't even, there was no hierarchy there whatsoever. The guards completely stayed hands off. And I thought that was a very dangerous situation that they set up for some of these men that had come to prison for the first time in their entire lives, with no criminal background whatsoever, no criminal mindset, and nonviolent charges. And so these nonviolent charges, in order to designate them to the Communications Management Unit, they had to essentially say that the unit is an administrative unit. So even though some of the individuals do not have special administrative measures attached to their case by their judges, they treat the unit as if everyone there does have a special administrative measure, and they say that for the functioning of the safety of the community inside the prison as well as outside the community in the prison, that they need to then vet all the communications, they need to treat them somehow different, and treat them and put them in a setting that's very similar to the maximum security setting. And so I found that deeply troubling and completely out of sync with what the Bureau of Prisons says their processes are to the public. So you have what's outwardly facing. We have a graph, we have a custody classification score, their history, their criminal history, the events related to their crime, etc. We'll place them at some point on this graph, and we always adhere to the graph. It's true except for with Muslims. They all of a sudden break off that graph and they say, well, we're going to put some sort of special administrative measure, or we're going to put you in an administrative unit to deal with it. And I think it's racist, and I think it's unconstitutional.
Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about the CMUs. They were set up suddenly and illegally. Back in 2006, they had started talking about setting these things up, and when you do that, you're supposed to publish the regulations in this thing called the Federal Register and take public comment. And they started that process, and they got a lot of comments from the Civil Liberties Union and other groups saying this is going to be unconstitutional. You're looking at putting people in this special prison unit for sort of vague reasons, and there's no mechanism to challenge that. And so they said, okay, we won't do it. They just withdrew it. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the night in December 2006, they just picked up a whole bunch of people, well, not that many at the time, and just started it illegally and secretly. And so Yassine got sentenced a few months after that, and he ended up there. And they said he was there because he was communicating with a terrorist group. They give you this little paragraph notice, and he wasn't. it was a sting operation, and he wasn't even trying to communicate. He wasn't even trying to communicate with that group. He said he has no interest in that group, and so he tried to challenge this through what's called the administrative remedy process, which is on this handout. You know, you go through. He even wrote a poem about it. BP9, BP10. You submit an informal resolution first, and then it goes. Then there's a BP9 report that goes to the warden, and then there's a regional appeal to the regional office, and then finally to the central office for that region. Or I guess the central office for the Bureau of Prisons General Counsel. And so he went through that whole process, and I wrote the appeal to the General Counsel, and finally they just changed it up because they knew it was false. They just changed it up, and they just said, no, you're there because of the nature of your offense. Totally vague. Anyway, so a lot of people are there for similar faults and wrong and stupid reasons. And so the Center for Constitutional Rights started a lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons about the CMUs, and Yassine is the lead plaintiff. There's a bunch of plaintiffs. It's called a Ref v. Holder, and it's moving forward. It's taking forever, but they got a lot of discovery already, showing that there's these bogus reasons for things, and that they're not following even the rules that they have, and so hopefully that will result in some changes or dismantling of the CMUs eventually, if the judge doesn't throw it out, because now there's a different judge. There was a good judge before, it got transferred to a different judge. So, but hopefully it will end up with some due process for getting people out of the CMUs. And meanwhile, since they realized that this lawsuit was going forward, they did move a lot of people out of them. So a lot of times people are only there for a certain period of time, and then they get reviewed and they're maybe moved out. But some people stay for a long time. Let's see. One thing that people ask about is what about getting the person moved close to home? And that's another thing where the guidelines for the Bureau of Prisons say you're supposed to be within 500 miles of your home or family, wherever you want to be. But when it comes to these cases, they say, oh, there's an exception because they're going to the CMU or they're going to the ADX, or we have to separate them from their co-defendants. So there's a lot of, and sometimes just for no apparent reason, they'll just move people anywhere they feel like, and you can't really challenge that in court, because even though the judge can say they want them to be close to their home, or they want them to be in a particular prison, it's not up to the judge, it's up to the Bureau of Prisons, and there's no way to go to court to challenge where somebody's placed. Sometimes if people are in solitary confinement with really harsh conditions for a long time and there's no good reason for it, it's not like you got a serious disciplinary violation or you have special administrative measures or anything like that. So, for example, Layla's son, Ziad, can I talk a little bit about that? He's been in the SHU in Coleman, Florida since October 2013 for no reason. Never got in trouble. Like, oh, he's not there because of a disciplinary violation. He's just there because they say they're investigating what, I don't know, because it's been going on, for over a year now. And so with a situation like that, we may be able to actually go to court to challenge it in a habeas petition, because the courts say that if the conditions of confinement are so much worse than the usual, that is considered a deprivation of liberty, and that you can raise it in a habeas petition, and it's gone on so long that we may be able to do that if they don't let him out of the SHU soon. But it's really hard to go to court to challenge a lot of these things. Another area where there is some possibilities for challenges is religious rights, because and it's not even a constitutional issue, but there's two laws that Congress passed for religious freedom, and one of them applies to federal prisoners. It's the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and that is the law that was used in the John Walker Lind challenge at the CMU to be able to have group prayer. Because the law says that if somebody has sincere religious beliefs and the prison is not allowing them to practice their religion, like having group prayer, that they have to have a compelling reason why they're not allowing that, and that by not allowing it, that has to be the only way that they can achieve their compelling objective. So it's a really strong standard. And so that's what they said in the Hobby Lobby case too. So in the Hobby Lobby case at the Supreme Court, it's a totally different kind of case, but it's under that same law. And they said in that the two laws are the one that applies to federal prisoners and one that applies to state prisoners, that they're identical in terms of the standard, that it's this compelling reason standard. So that was good. And so in the judge in Terre Haute did say that John Walker Lind and the other people there who have the same beliefs did have the right to group prayer. And I think they said it 3 times a day, because the other 2 times were while they were locked in. But and the prison ignored it for quite a while, and they had to come back into court and say, no, we really meant it. And I think they're able to do that now, but in Marion, I don't think they're following it. But it could be applied anywhere. It may take more lawsuits. So that's something that maybe our legal committee can take up. And also there's a case at the Supreme Court right now involving a Muslim prisoner with a religious issue. And I think it's going to be a good decision, because that's the state of Alabama is telling this guy that he can't have a half-inch beard. They're only allowing him to have a 1/4 inch beard. He's saying he'd like to have a full beard, but he'll settle for half an inch. And, it's a religious issue. And Alabama is saying, no, you could hide contraband in that 1/4 inch, between the 1/4 inch and the half inch. It's completely insane. The federal government actually filed a brief in favor of the prisoner, saying, this is stupid, like, we allow it, all the other states allow it, what's wrong with Alabama? And Alabama's saying, no, Alabama's different, I don't know. So I don't think it's, at the oral argument, it was kind of ridiculous. The judges were kind of making fun of the guy from Alabama. So I think that's going to be a good decision, but they'll probably try to limit it a lot. But anyway, so there's some room for some things some challenges there with the religious stuff.
One thing that I noticed is the arbitrary nature in which people are designated to the CMU. Some of it makes sense, but I'd say as much of it as 2/3 of it doesn't completely make sense. And I bring this up because when Kathy had mentioned the discovery process in the RFB Holder case, I got some of my discovery from that case. I didn't know it was in there. I didn't know my materials were in there. Rachel Miracle from the CCR sent me a packet, and the packet clearly had to do with me. And in it, there were 5 people that essentially signed off on me being shipped from the prison in North Carolina to the prison at Marion, Illinois. And 4 of those 5 people suggested that I not be sent, that I'd be a waste of bed space, while one of them said that they believed that because I continued to engage in political activity, and because it was an election year, there was going to be a Republican National Convention that year, that they had recommended that I be put on heightened surveillance within the Bureau of Prisons. 4 years prior to that, when I was in New York City, I was loosely involved with organizing some of the protests that happened against the Republican National Convention in New York City. And my initial thought was, in 2008, was maybe this is just an extension of that. Now that I'm in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, maybe they're just saying, oh, well, we're going to keep him under thumb even more so during this election year, so that way he can't write any dispatches or something like that to the activist community in the outside world. Completely arbitrary, however, to see that 4 of the 5 individuals dissented, and so there was never this kind of unanimous process. All one person in Washington had to say was, just put him in the CMU. Then when they say to the public or through the media why some of us get designated, they either buckle down on security concerns or they try to make it sound as if we've had recidivist behavior while in the prison complex to do things like misuse the telephones or collect news clippings or do any one of these mundane tasks that somehow further a political conspiracy or something that threatens the security for the public. This was not the case. The only substantive thing that they included in my transfer documents is that I had contact with the Humane Society of the United States, which showed that I engaged in recidivist behavior. The Humane Society of the United States is a quasi-governmental organization that gets government money, that functions here in Washington, D.C. That's a very welfaristic group. It's not radical in any way whatsoever. And I had minimal contact with them. Like, I had a few letters back and forth, and I supported a campaign that they were doing in an essay that I wrote. And they were using this as somehow evidence against me that I was a recidivist animal activist and therefore a criminal. I'm not going to say that what landed me in prison was completely non-criminal. I'm going to be actually completely transparent with you guys. I was involved with a fairly radical protest campaign. We did protests at people's homes. I think, in retrospect, I find some of it in poor taste. I think that my heart was in the right place for organizing those protests, but I don't necessarily think the campaign was the nicest thing that we can do. And we got sentenced between 1 and 6 years each. The organizers of the campaign, I got 3 years. It was. What I was found guilty of was a violation of the Animal Enterprise Protection Act. That law has a lot of constitutional problems with it as well. If you read it, it essentially says that if you cause financial damage to a business that uses animals, you can go to jail on potentially terrorism charges. And that's exactly what I did. I caused the company to lose millions of dollars of value in the stock market through a kind of very creative campaign of protesting their investors. And we would bring the protests to their houses or to their golf courses or to like kind of luncheons or parties in the Hamptons. We would find them when they were like schmoozing their rich buddies. And that was kind of our thing. We would chase rich people and protest outside of their events. And so, I mean, like I said, I'm not exactly a goody two-shoes, but I'm not a terrorist either. But that was the nature of the campaign before I went to prison. So now I'm in prison and I'm pretty quiet. I'm doing some writing my family, my loved ones, etc. I'm not trying to be overtly radical because I'm trying to get out. And they said that my contact with the Humane Society of the United States showed that I had political intentions to continue my work after I got out of prison. They had to further monitor my behavior. And so they used that as the reason to transfer me to the CMU. Now, that reason to me is completely arbitrary and almost comical. When I hear about some of the other individuals and the kind of implied racism, because some of these people will not be like on their face bigots. Instead, what they're thinking is they don't understand how a community operates. They don't understand some of the language. They don't understand why someone might switch back and forth between English and Arabic in a letter. They don't understand these things. Some of them might be from the South. They've never seen it before. And they're like, oh, is this code? Is this? And as you start to have these systems in place, systems that baked in have a sense of racism or xenophobia, this kind of post 9/11 paranoia baked into it, the moment you start applying these systems to the way a community functions, it now chills the speech of that community, it hurts the community members, it further penalizes them after they've already been in prison. And so this designation to the CMU and what Kathy highlighted in the discovery process is showing that time and time again, a lot of individuals are being designated to the CMU for maintaining some sort of degree of political speech. And it's not necessarily radical speech, it's just political speech. And so this nation, the United States of America, prides itself on being a country that has no political prisoners. And they try to kind of circumvent that with the fact that Guantanamo Bay is not on US soil, to say that, well, we don't have any political prisoners on US soil. Well, we do. And there are 3 institutions in the United States, I'll even argue more, but the communications management units, as well as ADX, as well as the FMC Carswell for female prisoners in the system. The FMC Carswell has a unit very similar to the communications management unit in the basement of it. FMC stands for Federal Medical Center at Carswell, Texas. and there's about 27 women that are locked up there under similar circumstances as the men that are in the CMUs, being denied their communication or contact with their loved ones. Again, low security classification points, and they're being treated as if they're the worst of the worst. And this is a deeply political reason for keeping people confined this way. There's no argument that once you take a look at it, these are political designations, and yet we have an administration that prides itself and a country that prides itself on having no political prisoners. So it's either one or the other.
And let me just say something real quick, that one of those prisoners at FMC Carswell under that special classification is Dr. Obvious.
Yeah, and she's kept pretty incommunicado out there. Yassine at one point when he was in the CMU and Steve went to visit him with his Yassine's 2 young boys at the time, he didn't get a contact visit. He had the usual through the glass visit, and he I think this was in 2007, and he said, "How are they treating you?" And Yassine refused to answer, and he kept saying, "No, wait, how are they treating you here?" And finally Yassine said, "It's really bad. They're just like watching us all the time, and it's really, really bad." And so then I wrote to him a legal mail letter, and I said, "Tell us what's going on." Oh, they kicked Steve out of the visit with the sons after he had driven for 2 days there. He'd been there 15 minutes, and they said, "Oh, you're using a pen as a recording device because you're writing this down," and they kicked them out for having a recording device, which is a pen. But so then we were worried, so I said, "Tell us what's going on. It's a legal matter, and as a legal mail." So he wrote this whole essay called "Dead Life in a Political Prison," and talked about how they're trying to get us to fight each other, but we're not buying it. They're putting Sunnis and Shiites together from Lebanon and trying to get them to fight, and they're trying to, and that's a technique that prisons use a lot, is try to get people to fight each other for their own purposes, so then they can say, "Oh, this is dangerous, so we need to do all these repressive measures." Actually, when I was in jail for protest once, they tried to get some people to attack. It's like a uncommon thing that prisons do. So this is part of what the CMU, I think, was doing, is what Yassine was saying in this essay. And another thing, they did put some people there, non-Muslims there, who really did have problems with their communications, where they're con artists and they're trying to steal money so there's this guy there who started writing to me. He was one of these people that the sovereign citizen movement thing, and he had this idea that you could file liens on banks to get money from the bank. Basically, it's stealing money. And unfortunately, one of the reason he was writing to me is because he befriended in the way that the informants befriend somebody. He was trying to use one of the young men from one of our cases, whose family's not here, but one of the young men, and who was believing what this guy was saying. And he tried to get his parents to file one of these liens. And I said, "Wait a minute, don't do that. Your parents may end up in prison if they do this. Tell this guy to leave you alone." But unfortunately, he was really kind of under his spell. So this is another danger with the CMUs, is they put people like that there, the con artists, and then the young vulnerable guys from our cases, some of them will be hurt by this, or their families might be hurt by it.
To give you an example, and I think before we close, I'd like to finish on something more positive than this, so I'm going to say something negative first. But when I was in North Carolina, there was a 5-star general with the Bloods gang who said that he was the son of a Black Panther and was really interested in the fact, before I went to prison, I had toured with former Black Panthers speaking at colleges, and so I had a lot of literature that they sent me, books, etc. And I had no problem sharing my books with, gang members, whomever, that wanted to educate themselves and learn about history and social struggle in the United States. And it turns out that this individual, and I'm not going to say names, but they approached the captain of the prison and then the warden, and they said they wanted to come home sooner, and they felt that they befriended me and that they might be able to do something to me. And so they had asked that my friends that have technical capabilities build a website for a radio show that they were doing from prison. What they were doing is once a week they were calling a college radio station that would play hip-hop music, and then they talk about politics and radical struggle, etc. And that they wanted to build a website around it, and they essentially wanted to build a profile of this one gang leader on the website. And I said, yeah, I don't really have a problem, introducing you to one of my friends that makes websites. I have no problem with that. Like, you guys could do that. That sounds like a nice idea, doing a blog or something. And they said, we really should have a donation button to pay for some of the guys' commissary that has no money. So at that point, one of the younger, and this is very dangerous for this individual, one of the younger members of the Blood Gang approached me on the yard outside of this individual, and they said, hey, what they're trying to do is they're trying to run drug money through the donate button on the website to launder it, and you'd be responsible for it if you get caught. And they've already talked to the captain and the warden. They said if we can get him implicated with this, he'll get another 10 years, and then the other guy gets to come home 5 years sooner. That was the deal that they had worked out, was that the gang leader can come home sooner. And so here's someone that wasn't even an FBI informant, but could sense that politically the FBI was interested in me because of the amount of mail I was getting, the fact that the media was trying to visit the prison and they couldn't get in, things like that, and saw an opportunity. And so it's very important that everyone who has loved ones in there to kind of maintain a very low profile, to not stand out that much, because there are individuals that are opportunistic, that I don't like saying this, but can be quantified as more criminal than what we'd expect of the other people. And we have to be careful to make sure that our family members and our loved ones don't fall victim to those individuals as well. So those con artists, I saw a lot of that, and I saw some of it while I was at the CMU. The sovereign citizens movement that was there, it's a very interesting phenomenon. Some of the white males that were designated there that are not Muslim, some of them are actually bigots, not all of them, but some. They're loosely related to the Tea Party, this movement, and they practice an old form of maritime law that's never been taken off the books, and they try to use liens as a form of extortion. And so a lot of them that were sent to the CMU were sent to the CMU for putting liens on the judges that sent them to prison for things like tax evasion and things like that. So the judges were angry at them politically for putting liens on them, because apparently they couldn't shake this lien. It was messing up their credit rating, and they had to go through a higher court process to do this, because apparently this paperwork's still stuck, because no one thought that these laws were being used anymore, and this maritime law was apparently still functional in the criminal justice system.
It doesn't usually actually get them any money.
It doesn't get them any money, but it really,
the people that they put them on.
It really ties up the finances and such of the people that are targeted, and so those individuals were in there as well. And it's important that we're all kind of very not paranoid, but we encourage our loved ones not to maintain a high profile while in there, because they could be victimized by anybody, not just the guards, not just the administration.
Yeah, I don't know about not maintaining a high profile, because that can help you too, it can protect you, but it can also make you vulnerable to these kinds of things. And even after Yassine got moved to a low security prison, where he is now in Loretto, Pennsylvania, they did stuff like this because John Kiriakou was a whistleblower who was in the CIA, I think, and he's a whistleblower, so he's in prison with Yassine in Loretto. And when he first got there, they told him that Yassine was trying to kill him, and they told Yassine that Kiriakou was trying to kill him. Luckily, they managed to figure out that this was a ploy by the prison, and they get along, but they can't really spend a lot of time together or anything. But that's the kind of
I'm
thing.
friends with John Kiriakou and his family.
You wrote a whole thing about that.
I don't think I wrote about it, but
He did.
Oh yeah, he wrote a whole thing about it. I was with him a few days before he turned himself in to the FBI to serve his sentence, and one of the things that happened right off the bat was, if they cannot get someone to go to a communications management unit, the next best thing that they could do is try to relegate someone to the hole or to the SHU, and then say that they're under investigation. As part of that investigation, they then vet their mail, they vet their communications. When you're in the SHU, you only get one phone call a week anyway, because they wheel the phone around in a cart They pass the receiver through a kind of meal slot that's in your solitary confinement cell. So it's much easier to control someone and their communications if they're in the shoe. Not only that, but they love putting high-profile individuals that don't necessarily resonate with lots of positive media attention. They like putting those individuals in solitary confinement because they're kind of like out of sight, out of mind, and they're able to control the narrative better. And so what happens is in the case of John Karaoke, one thing that they did was they went to the compound, they went to the imam on the compound at Loretto, and they said to the imam and others that there's a guy coming here and he kills Muslims for a living. And now, in general prison yards, and we're not talking about particularly devout Sunni Muslims, but we're talking about new converts and others to Islam. A lot of people are enamored by Islam in the prison system because it's an alternative to falling into the gang culture. Some white individuals that don't want to click up with groups like the Odinists or the Nazis or some of those other Aryan Brotherhood and some of the groups that are in there, Islam becomes a really quick fix. Hey, if I fall into Islam, I don't need to be racist, I don't need to do this, I don't need to do that. But there is sort of a family orientation there, and it isn't necessarily like the community that we see outside of the prison walls. It is a kind of, we protect our own. And so people go there as a form of protection. If you say to and I'll say the federal system's better than the state system, but if you say to any community in a prison that this individual kills your people for a living, it's very dangerous. And John Karaoke, I actually like him as a person. Yes, he was responsible for trying to chase some of the 9/11 hijackers around the world and find who was responsible for that when he worked at the CIA. However, though, he quickly turned around when he realized that some of the people that he brought into custody were being waterboarded, and he was responsible for blowing the whistle on CIA torture, and so that's why he's in prison now. So he has a very, you might not agree with him on every stance, but he has a pretty strong moral compass. The moment he saw something, he says, I'm against this, I think this is against our ideals, is when he blew the whistle, and that's why he's in prison now. So what they did is they created a very dangerous situation for him, and I don't necessarily think that they were trying to kill him, but what would happen was if they put him in a very threatening situation, he might opt for protective custody. And once he opts for protective custody, they'll send him to the hole, and they'll keep renewing this quote-unquote investigation, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, to keep him out of sight, out of mind, limited communications, etc. So it's a form of management. And that is even within the prison system, if they can't get someone to the CMU, that is a way that an individual compound might try to manage a case they don't fully understand, is how can we get them to the hole? And if they can't get them to the hole out of threat, out of protective custody, they might do something as simple as giving a bag of commissary to some young, maybe under the influence or mentally disturbed person to punch you while you're in the chow hall. And then they say, hey, we're worried about your safety. We need to conduct an investigation to make sure that you'll be safe out in the yard, and then in you go. So that happened to me once. I got punched in the face by one of the members of the Bloods. It was actually when I confronted them on this, what I thought was a plot to get me in trouble. And I got into a fight with the guy. And I was okay, but I tried to stay near my cell because I knew there were cameras everywhere, and I knew that if they saw bruises on me, that they'd do exactly the same thing. And so there were some guys that would make makeshift makeup to cover up bruises, kind of like impromptu makeup. And so they were putting stuff on me, and I had an orange hat, and I wasn't going to the chow hall because I didn't want to walk past guards. I was just staying in my cell or going to the yard, and while I was going to the yard, I put on makeup before I would go to the yard. And I remember twice that week, the guards came to my cell and they said, did anything happen this week? Is anyone threatening you? Are you okay? Do you feel safe? And I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I'm just writing what's going on. Why are you wearing a hat? Cold. Things like that. And I remember knowing exactly what it was. And I remember my biggest fear was not getting beat up again. It was, I don't want to go back to the hole. My biggest fear was like, if they, all they have to do is say, we're worried about his life being in jeopardy, and they'll put me right back in the hole. I'd rather have my life be in jeopardy than be in solitary confinement, honestly. So that's another form of management. And again, that's negative, but I will say a few positive things before we close.
I'll just tell one story and then we'll open it up to everybody else. But I know you've got a lot of good stories. I represent Dr. Raphael Dafir just on the prison issue. Well, actually, he would be eligible for a camp, the minimum security, except that the U.S. attorney told somebody from the Bureau of Prisons that he's a Salafi and a Sheikh. And so all his communications need to be monitored. That's it. It's just purely a religious issue, nothing else. And so I'm filing a lawsuit about him not being eligible for camp just because of his religion. So I don't even know if it's going to win, but anyway. But meanwhile, while I'm communicating with him about doing this lawsuit, he was put into solitary during Ramadan. And they said they're investigating, and somebody told him it's because you were praying. I said, well, so he was in solitary. They said it could be for up to 90 days for investigation. And it lasted for all of Ramadan, and then it went on for a while. It went almost up to the full 90 days, and then all of a sudden they let him out with no charges. They said, we were investigating, but they weren't really investigating. They never questioned anybody, which is what they're supposed to do. It was just to lock him up during Ramadan and maybe keep him from working on the lawsuit or his underlying case. And then when they let him out, the reason they let him out, we had a call-in day where a lot of people called the prison, and this was at Devon's in Massachusetts. I guess they weren't used to this. Because at Coleman, they just ignore it, or they don't even answer the phone, because we did this for Ziad. But at Devon's, they took it pretty seriously, and they wrote back to people who had written letters, and they were upset about the phone calls, and they let him out right after that of solitary. But then they retaliated against him by taking his medication away, and he has some fairly substantial medical conditions where for high blood pressure was the worst one. They took all his medication away for 2.5 weeks, and his blood pressure was starting to get really bad. And finally I called, and as soon as I was on vacation before that. As soon as I could, I called, and then right away they gave him his medication back. But this is that's dangerous, the kind of thing they do to retaliate for him having people call the prison, which got him out of the shoe, but then they take his medication away. So it's But I think the best thing is to stand up and have lots of people paying attention and calling and writing, because I think you end up better overall that way.
Well, I think it's a balance. I would get a lot of periodicals and Christmas cards and things like that sent to me by, people would put your name and information on the website, and then there'd be these parties where everyone would send you cards. And so one Christmas, I remember getting 300 or 400 cards in one day. And that's the type of high profile I think that, creates jealousy or animosity, especially if there's a man who's been in prison for 10 years and is hoping to see maybe a letter from a parent or a loved one. They see nothing. And then I was 25 at the time, to see some, jerk privileged kid come in and get all these letters. I could see how it could be frustrating or kind of make you a target for extortion and things like that, or be at least misconstrued as maybe he has money. And that's always something that piques the interest of certain folks. So it's a balance. It's knowing that you have your people able to protest for you at any moment. I remember in North Carolina, to support what Kathy just said, I was in the SHU once for about 2 weeks because they were investigating me they thought I was writing a book, and they thought they had all of it, but they didn't. And they were wondering how some people wrote me back saying, oh, we got some of your manuscript from your lawyer. And they were trying to investigate, how did I get it out? And I said, well, legal mail. And they said, but, and then they were in kind of a catch-22. Because I looked at them and I said, do you open my legal mail? Because that's a crime. And then at that point, they're like, we're gonna get you out of here, but we're gonna drop everything. And I was like, So that's why they were investigating me, because they were opening my legal mail and they knew that this portion of the manuscript didn't leave that way. What had actually happened, and this was my kind of intuition, I had no proof they were opening my legal mail, but I had a sense they were. What I did is I found a friend that I worked with at the prison library, and I got them in touch with an attorney, a civil attorney, that worked in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles, and they started communicating with one another, and then that individual was sending via legal mail my manuscript to the attorney, not me. So that way, when they were going through the prison mailroom, they weren't seeing my name, they weren't flagging it to open it up. And so I kind of caught them in committing a crime, like an actual federal crime, a mail fraud crime. And they said,
do all the time.
well, yeah, which they do all the time. And then they kind of saw it as this catch-22 moment, like, oh, we're going to let you out of the SHU now. Well, the one thing that I heard time and time again, the captain would come back to my cell at the SHU once a day and say, we're really worried about your people protesting and shutting down the jail. And when I got out, there were individuals that kind of had jobs that would like sweep the compound and things like that, and that would work near the warden's office. And they said that they were preparing drills with riot cops running around the jail, thinking that like there was going to be thousands of people descending on the jail. Now I want to be like, most of my friends are in New York. I don't think they care about me enough to come all the way down to North Carolina. They might write some stern letters, but like, if there's going to be a protest, it's probably going to look like 10 people holding a banner out at the end of the driveway, posing no threat whatsoever. But they were behaving in this manner that they didn't know what they were thinking of. So in many cases, this idea of high profile, and again, I'm kind of undercutting what I said before and supporting what you said, it also helps because they don't know what to think of you. They think of you as like a political force, and they're more likely to get you out. The truth was that wasn't the case at all. I can't turn out a protest of thousands of people to support me. My life depended on it.